All right. I'm back.
Wow. What's the sunshine over there?
Jeremy messaged me yesterday and was like, we should call this Return of the King.
Wow.
I was like, absolutely.
I did actually.
close.
The first one was Empire Strikes Back.
Return of the King. That sounds a little better.
Yeah. Well, episode 33. Here we are.
Yes.
No Lisa today,
No.
but
World
Jeremy,
world
Keith,
traveler.
World traveler. Yeah. Not on her own plane.
No,
But
thankfully.
yeah, that thing wouldn't have made
I'd be curious to see
Wouldn't
that
made
thing
it.
flying down to Mexico.
it.
So my sports guys for this week, you guys are gonna not like this one, but in honor of Max Verstappen, Formula One driver, winning his 4th World Drivers' Championship last weekend in Vegas. So in Formula One, you have a car number and you're always stuck with that number. Unless if you win the Drivers' Championship, then you get the option to take number 1. And then as soon as you're no longer...
Is that why they call it Formula One?
Yeah.
The formula is to win, so you can get that number.
But he used to... His car number used to be 33 before he won his first championship back in 2021.
So when you win it and then you don't the next year, just someone to replace you, then you
the
have to get rid of
winner,
your
so
one.
the winner has the option to take it, but because you're no longer the winner, you revert back to your old
Okay, so
car
you go back
number.
to your old number.
Yeah, so if he doesn't win next year, then he would take number 33 again
All right.
on his car. But
Hey, buddy.
I figured I'd get that one. But so I threw some in here for you guys. 33, Larry Bird, Kareem, Scottie Pippen, and then Patrick Ewing for Jeremy.
Those are good
Bas-
ones.
Those are
basketball guys.
all solid.
I mean,
four set.
some of the most famous basketball players.
I always think Bird with 33. I always forget Kareem. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know why. He's probably the 3rd or 4th best player of all time. But I always forget him as 33. I always think about Bird when I think about that number.
And then Jeremy yelled at me for having Shaq in here for a minute. So
I didn't yell. I just was disgusted by it.
and then Keith for hockey, I threw in Patrick Waugh and Henrik Sedin.
Nice.
I don't,
Yeah.
figured those are good guys.
Actually, Bird. I like Bird. I mean, that was back when I watched the NBA. Was Lakers Celtics. I was a big fan of the rivalry. So,
Can't beat the 80s.
Nope.
Can't beat the 80s for Lakers Celtics.
Yeah.
That's
And then
pretty solid.
the last one I had was Minnesota Vikings, Aaron Jones. He's having a great season for the Vikings.
the little local flavor to end
there
it.
you go.
Yeah. But my hot button today is the renewed tariff discussion. I know we heard a lot about it throughout the election, at least. But now Trump has announced 25% on Mexico and Canada, and an additional 10% on the current Chinese tariffs that are in place. So I'm just curious, what are you guys' thoughts on tariffs? Are they good, bad? Are you indifferent? Are they a tool that can be used to get leverage over another country? Like, what do you guys think?
You want me to start?
You can start. Yeah.
They're going to make things more expensive. Yes, they're a tool that you can use against another country, and they can be highly effective tools to do that. But just understand that it has consequences, right? Is whether that rotates things to other nations. I think that's, and brings things home, if you will. That's probably the goal of a tariff to a certain extent. But just understand that tariffs aren't going to make things cheaper. There's no way, shape, or form. I don't know how that happens, right? Is that you have to either change behavior or you have to accept a higher cost to bring that in. And if you change behavior, that probably increases costs too. So
Sure.
I don't know how you get around the fact that probably makes things more expensive. Maybe you guys have a counter argument to this. I'd be very open to hearing about it because I'm not the expert when it comes to tariff and unintended consequences. My unintended consequence, though, is probably things just get more expensive. What's your thoughts, Gangl?
I generally like the thoughts of using them, just how much more as a tool, bring the other party to the negotiating table. So if we go back to when,
What are we negotiating for, though, when you're doing that?
part of it, you want to have more manufacturing in the U.S. versus, we import so much more than we export. So that was, I think, if you go back into history, look at Trump's first ones, he wanted a little bit more. He called it unfair trade practices, right? We import a ton of their stuff. They don't import a bunch of our stuff. So he's kind of trying to level the balance there. Now, if you go back to when he first introduced these tariffs, they're still in place, even when Biden was elected. So that's why I find it
China
interesting,
ones,
right?
yeah.
Everybody hated them. I was like, well, if you hated them, why didn't you repeal them? So I think they could be useful. So again, a tool. Now, if you do like a 60% across the board, I think that's a disaster. Kind of what you're pointing to. Goods are going to go up. So that's kind of my opinion on them.
Yeah, I don't really want to go down the political path either.
Sure. Yeah.
My opinion is that these ones are a little bit different than, trying to bring manufacturing home. I think it's trying to get leverage over border security, maybe.
Okay.
I think that's probably a broader point for Trump and his team right now. So I don't know that it's because, we've been hearing about this onshoring, nearshoring since COVID, right? Can we get our supply chains intact so that, if we do have, God forbid, another type of pandemic, at least our manufacturing is, just south of the border or within the border, right? So you don't have to wait for ships to come all the way across. And, but I think this one's a little bit different than actually trying to get manufacturing here. I think it's just leverage to try to bring Canada, Mexico to the border or to the table on border discussions, and maybe China on I know there was a mention of some drug policies and whatnot.
Yeah,
for
the
China,
fentanyl. And the one that he's talking about for Canada and Mexico is a 25% tariff. And that's going to be, he claims, an executive order on day one, right? So that is something that he did. He did the same thing back in 2017 or 18 with Canada with the NAFTA trade agreement. He, I think it was 5% for those guys, and it never went into place because they didn't negotiate something else.
Yeah.
So I think that is a pure negotiating
But
tool.
To Jeremy's point too, though, so Mexico, we imported $475 billion last year. Canada was $418 billion, and China was $427 billion. So if you pump those, and if it's a across the board tariff without any carve outs, tack on an extra 25% for that, just in pure price that they have to pay.
Math gets difficult.
Yeah.
It just gets, and I don't even know what that constitutes, right? From the percentage, from the numbers you put in there, like what's the biggest percent, because I know we bring in a lot of oil from there, right? Mm-hmm. And the argument is, hey, well, we'll just turn our pumps on. Yeah. There's an argument to be made there that we'll just replace it with more U.S. production. Could be. I don't know. The adjustments there, again, from a goals perspective, like what are you trying to do? If it's a leverage and negotiating point, totally get it. But from the side of we're going to use this to enhance economic growth or lower costs, I don't know if that, I don't know if I buy that one.
No, I don't. I think it's pure negotiation. And like those numbers you threw out, Tyler, I read another stat back in 2016-17, we imported about, I think it's 26% of our imports were from China. Now we're down to 13%. Mm-hmm. So they have had some impact, right?
Yeah.
So
was that tariffs or was that COVID though?
Probably a little both, but that's a pretty dramatic. And now I think if the numbers that you have are pretty similar to the ones I saw too, I think our trade partners, actually Canada and Mexico, are a lot more important than actual China. Which that's
well, just on pure numbers. Mexico's now our largest trade partner. We're going to slap them with a 25% tariff.
And I think the North American China or Canada and Mexico are, that one I think is just pure. You have to change something. Yeah, and I think that changes and that kind of goes away. I don't think that happens, but we'll see.
Yeah, he said it all right in his commentary, right? As he said, it's part of the border and securing the borders and all that stuff. Yep. But this is a potential. I don't want to call it a penalty, but it's kind of a penalty for you not doing things that we want to do there. So do that, or we're going to do this.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that is this good or bad for U.S. stocks? Like, just what are your thoughts? Because I think it's hard to understand, like, do tariffs hurt, companies in Mexico, or does it hurt companies in the U.S., or is it both? Like, who wins in this? Does anybody win? Well,
if you're importing, for small companies, right? If you're importing something that you need to make your goods, that's going to hurt you, right? Unless you can pass that cost on, right? If you're paying 25% for whatever steel or something that's coming in, then you have to pass that on to your customers. That's where Jeremy's talking about that increased cost. So but if you can now say that you can more manufacture something here that you didn't, or I think that's a benefit, right? That you can sell something that you're more competitive on pricing, and that China's maybe now at the same price you are on whatever widget you're producing. So, but if you're producing here, it's probably could be a net negative.
I have a very chicken answer. Is the companies who can't adapt to it are going to be, and you're seeing who is you're starting to see this in markets, right? Is we're starting to see people pick their winners and losers. You had the pre-election thought about winners and losers, and now we see the cabinet starting to come through. We see where his potential first offerings are, and you're starting to see people pick winners and losers on that, right? I own a stock that's probably considered somewhat of a loser, Constellation Brands. They're the makers of Modelo,
not Constellation Energy.
No, makers of Modelo beer. And so
where's that? Just in case people don't know,
Modelo, Mexico.
Yeah. Okay.
It's also now the number one U.S. beer brand, by the way. But that side is
much longer.
that's maybe the thought there. And so the stock has had a really difficult time here recently because of those types of thoughts in the effect of, hey, tariffs or whatever is going to happen. These things are going to go up. I'm going to go to Coors Light because now that's cheaper.
Let's ask our resident expert on Mexican beer. Coronas.
Yeah. Are
you going to keep buying Coronas if the prices go up 25%?
And probably switch back to Coors Light. So that's Jeremy's point. I think it has unintended consequences, and there'll be some winners and losers, and that's kind of a direct one. I think the broader implications for the economy, there's a lot of indirect that we won't hear about. That's kind of the bigger takeaway. How these tariffs impact, and again, even us that follow the market on a day-to-day basis, you just don't exactly know.
Yeah,
kind of making some assumptions of how long are they going to stay around? Again, like if you go back to how bad everybody thought these tariffs would be when Trump introduced them in his first term, they didn't get repealed. That's why I keep on going back to, right? They were targeted. They achieved some goal that they wanted to. And if the next administration thought they were so horrible, they would have been repealed. And they haven't been. So I think it's useful. But if you go too much, I think could be an ultimate disaster.
Well, and I think from the company standpoint too, it's hard to, we don't see into the books, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know if they're making a specific product or widget, how much of that product or widget is coming from Taiwan, how much of is it coming from China, how much of the product is coming from Mexico. Like all of those, the inputs come from a lot of different places. Yep. So it's hard to actually pinpoint like how much price increase you might see on a given product. Mm. You can't just say, well, the product ships from Mexico, so I'll broadly see 25%. But like if the main base is here in the US, right, you just can't, they're going to get hit at some point, but it's hard to figure that out, I think, from the company standpoint.
Yeah, the one that a little bit surprised me the other day was, obviously Jeremy mentioned that's his stock, but like GM, we don't own it on here, but you would think GM's U.S. car makers should benefit that. The stock was down 8% when these tariffs got announced, right? Because they build a lot of their stuff in Mexico and send it back here and, finish the product. But
Toyota Motors is one that I own in our international portfolio. For the U.S. consumers, a lot of it comes from Mexico too. So, I mean, cars especially, but I think broader, I think it's my opinion is that it's bad for stocks in general, especially when you talk about the price increases. How much can consumers actually take on? Like, how much do you think companies at this point, we've had 4 years of pretty significant price increases. Yeah. How much more do you think consumers can actually take on?
Well, consumers are not much more, probably, is my guess. It depends on, you got to stratify those levels, right? Yeah. The top end probably can take a lot more. The bottom end is probably not going to take much more. But the other side of that is you have to counter that with the fact that we're at all-time high profit margins in the S&P 500, right? So a little bit of cry me a river to a certain extent, from the side of, we've had massive inflation that, they've passed a lot of that pricing through and their margins haven't suffered as a result. Now, again, that has to skew towards the service companies, right? Your Mag 7s are so big in the S&P 500. They don't care. All right. From their side, they're not bringing widgets in from Mexico. No. They're building services and things that they can use on the software side. So that may skew there, but from an overall perspective, I think the cost component, again, I heard somebody say it the other day, and I wish I could attest it to them, but something's going to break. We just don't know what or where. I think that's probably what happens, is that there's certain components, whether that potentially is autos, whether that's Constellation Brands, I don't know. But something probably breaks from these changes, because this will change. If those were enacted, it's going to change a massive amount of how we do things currently right now.
So do you think companies are just going to eat the cost?
No. Companies
they'll pass on as much as they can, right?
As much as they can.
Until there's a pushback point, and then that's when they'll have to dial it back and to Jeremy's point, their margins will come down a little bit, which we don't like to see as investors, right? We like to see
for consumers, it'd be really nice.
No, the other stat I read the other day is, again, everybody's guessing on these numbers, but if the full tariffs went in place, that would cost consumers about $1,600 a year. And to Jeremy's point, if you're a high-end person that's making quite a bit of money, $1,600 you could probably, be fine with. But if you're on the low end and then all of a sudden these tariffs are costing $1,600 a year, that's meaningful. Yeah. So again, these numbers are all, there's so many.
Well, I'll give you a classic example of that is you just mentioned, that would be good for consumers if margins went down to a certain extent, but how are they going to correct margins? They're probably going to chop people. Right. And then, so this is the exact example of that, is that everything is so intertwined, is that there's so many unintended consequences of this. We just don't know where that ends up, but we know it probably ends up somewhere. And it's going to change things. As Gangl said, there's probably some element of benefit from it. There's probably some element of detriment too. And just trying to figure out where that is going to be a company by company analysis, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Part of the tariffs, I think, revolves away from economics is national security, right? More in the semiconductors, things like that. Mm-hmm. I think they need, I think both administrations, believe that we need to have that closer to home, whether it's
that I completely agree
in Canada or in Mexico, certainly in the US, that, the chips, especially semiconductors, they're in everything. And if that kind of would get disrupted, that would cause a lot of economic pain just immediately across the board.
I don't really know the answer to this, so I'm going to ask, can the Mexican government and their president negotiate with Trump ahead of him being in office? Of like, we're going to, because he's going to do day one, he's going to do the 25%. So can they negotiate with Trump ahead of time? Like, is that legal?
Officially? Probably
officially not. No. I've been reading a lot of stuff that they've been kind of officially no, but I think back channeling they have been doing. And the same with, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East stuff, which sounds like hopefully we got at least a potential settlement there for, like Jeremy said, I'm not sure how long.
Yeah.
Something, which is positive, right? So I think a lot of back channeling, unofficial, right? And so you have some people saying that these tariffs from day one, the executive orders, if obviously there's something going on before then, right? I don't think they're also going to get 25% with no kind of like, well, wait a minute here. We'll do X, Y, Z before that happens.
Yeah. Because that's what I was going to ask, is like, what is the probability of these actually going into place?
Assigning probability to him right now is tough.
Yeah.
It does change here and there. I think there's.
And Trump is always a shoot from the hip kind of guy.
So. Yeah. So the probability wherever you put that number, you should probably expand the tails a little bit more.
0 to 100. How's that?
Exactly. That's probably what. But I wanted not to bring sports into everything, but your analogy on this was kind of funny to me, as in the effect of, can he negotiate? How many times do you see free agent deals where they're struck on day one? Do you think that entire contract was built that night?
Right.
Those are the kinds of, I equate it to that, is that, this transition is happening, right? And so maybe you can't officially do it, but are they going to sit there and spend a bunch of time with the Biden administration right now and saying, we really need to hammer out the next 5 years?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
So even if they can't officially do it, I'm pretty certain they're unofficially doing it.
Oh, for sure. And I think one difference between now, Trump 1.0 versus Trump 2.0 is, I think he's at least, whether you like tariffs or not, he's more organized now than where he was, his first term going in, just having people in place, kind of where he believes, and a little bit more kind of cohesive message. So again, they could be bad as well, the fact that maybe the tariffs are going to be a little bit more strict, a little bit more accurate, versus last time I think he was like, shooting from the hip of, we'll throw this out there and see what happens. So
right.
Yeah. Bottom line is he wants to do it and he can.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Enough about tariffs. Nerding out. So S&P 500 valuations. So I was at an event last week, and there were some questions about it, because I had a chart of it, and the question is always, well, what does this mean for the markets going forward? Does this mean that the market has to drop 20% for us to get back to average, right? I think that's a broader concern.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with this. Do you guys think that the market is overvalued with where valuations are at? Because, the 10-year average is 18 times next year's earnings. Right now we're sitting at 22 times, just over 22 times. So do you guys think it's overvalued?
I'll let the value guy go first.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I tend to be a believer in mean reversion over longer periods of time. Now, does it mean we have to go back to absolute average? Probably not. We could keep going here because, again, we're saying profit margins that are all-time highs. The companies that are driving those profit margins are some of the biggest companies on the planet, and they're going to have higher than average margins going forward. So you could argue for a higher multiple as a result of that. We're nerding out, so I can go as deep as I want in here. But from that side, I do believe that, I use history as a guidepost. It's not perfect, but it is a guidepost. And so if you go over longer periods of time, even in extended valuations were extended from there. So I think the market is overvalued as a result. Now, does that mean we have to correct 20% immediately in order to get it there? No, we could just sit here for a while earnings grow and we kind of grow into that multiple, right? And so it doesn't mean disaster, but it does mean you should be more cautious now than I think you should be at when times are cheaper. Now, human behavior goes the exact opposite way, right? Is that human behavior, these are go-go times, everything's great, let's keep going. And then when things actually get cheap, it's usually cheap for a reason, right? And people are scared at that point.
Yeah.
So, human behavior doesn't work well with this type of thing, but I think you should expect below long-term average returns when you're paying more for the market like we are right now.
Sure. So basically, if you, like you said, if we stay at 22 times, but the earnings side grows 8% in a year, you could expect the market to grow 8%.
That's if you stay exactly the same.
You don't get the extra added benefit.
You don't get the
multiple expansion going from 22 to 23 times.
Or the other side is, let's say we grow at 10% per year for the next couple of years, but the only market grows at 6 to 7, right? Well, you're getting cheaper just by that.
Yeah.
That's actually probably, now the market doesn't typically work that way, especially in shorter bursts, right? Because valuation doesn't really matter on the way, in 6 to 12 month increments on the way up nor the way down, because usually you don't stop at average, right?
Yeah.
Usually you go below average for a little while. So that's where, that's why I don't use valuation as a really good, especially 6 to 12 month tool. Valuation is a much better tool for longer periods of, hey, what's the next 3 to 5 years look like, not what the next 6 to 12 months looks like.
Yeah, you guys, it's well said. I agree. We're on the high end of valuation. I mean, we can stay there. The biggest thing I look at is earnings growth. Kind of, you touched on EPS. If we continue to grow, estimates for next year at that 12 to 15%. We've been talking 8 to 10. If it does 8 to 10, I think that's fine. Then you kind of get a normalized return, which never really happens, but that's at 8 to 10. Like Jeremy said, you never get the average. It's either one way or the other. But that's what I watch, for investing, is if we start seeing earnings start to slow, I will start getting a little more defensive. Then I do think then valuation quickly can go from 22 times to, like Jeremy said, you can go from not 22 to 18, you can go 22 to 16. So in that situation, you get slowing earnings and a multiple compression. That's where you could have a kind of a bad mark. I don't think we're there, but that's where I think I don't think you get, that 22 goes slowly to 21 to 20 type of deal.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting though, because I've been reading through some of the outlooks for 2025 from our lovely market strategists. And, we've talked about them before. It's usually useless to actually look at the price targets, more about what are they saying.
Yeah.
And I was listening to the call with RBC, Lori Calvasina, yesterday, and she was mentioning that their price target is using I think it was a 22 point something multiple. And her reason for using that and keeping it there was that when you start to look at other valuation metrics and return on assets, return on equity, it's much higher. And you alluded to it too, margins are a lot higher. So you've got higher margins, you've got higher return on equity, higher return on assets, which means you should be giving these companies a higher multiple versus, if a company had return on equity of 10% 5 years ago, and now they're sitting at a 15% return on equity, that's a more valuable company.
Yeah.
So that was her case for having a higher multiple, essentially.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I saw some people putting it 24 times for price, which starts to get a little bit. Basically, what they're trying to do is back in a 10% gain.
Well, so let me ask you this though: is the market structurally different now because the biggest companies in the world have such high margins, have such high growth, and they have such high multiples. So is it different this time than like a 2000 or 08 or 07, I should say, before 08? Like, is it structurally different because of the companies that are comprising, it's not energy stocks leading the S&P anymore?
A little bit, but even those high growth companies, their margins can go from, say, 70% to maybe 60, right? The market won't like that at all. So I think the argument that the market deserves a higher multiple over time because these are higher quality companies with better margin profiles and better growth profiles. Yeah, I believe that to some extent. But again, if your margins are going, whatever the new normal is for these companies, if it's 70% going down to 60, that'll be a problem for the market. So that's kind of where I fall on it.
We had similar composition in 2021. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
Now again, it wasn't what I would call an extra event. We went from 0% interest rates to the fastest growth in history, right? But that's the kind of thing that can happen, right? Usually it's that kind of stuff. It's not, things are just a little worse than they were before, so we're going to glide down that multiple. It doesn't happen that way. It happens, something outside of our control happened. We all consider that a negative, and the multiple gets hit as a result. So sure. It's different this time is always challenging for me, but they're always something different this time. But to say that we can sustain this level because the company composition is different, it's possible. I wouldn't bank my future on.
Yeah, it's just still, even if you give them the benefit of the doubt at these valuations, it's pretty high.
Yeah.
I don't see it sustainable for multi-years.
Is PE multiple still a good thing to use, or should people be looking at other valuation metrics instead? And I know people, this is why I also love Southside, is they always change what they're using for valuation to make their price target make sense. But is PE just a good broad-based tool, or is there something else that you guys think is a better thing to use?
I personally think it's a good broad base just because a lot of companies have earnings. Now, the issue is that some companies don't have earnings, and some companies you evaluate on EBITDA multiples and some on cash flow. But I think for a quick check on the overall health of the market, PE is as good as anything else.
Yeah. I mean, for a quick, easy one, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Check them all. And you'll find that there's not one that really tells you that we're cheap. Yeah. It's just they're all elevated. The magnitude of elevation is a little different, but all of them are above long-term averages. So go ahead, check them all, and see if it changes your story. It doesn't really change mine much.
All right. So I wasn't here last week, but you guys talked about Thanksgiving food. So
he really wanted in on that. I can tell already.
I did.
He's like, man, you couldn't wait a week for me.
Just so everybody knows, we're the day before Thanksgiving right now.
Yes.
So happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Yes. So since I didn't get on that, there was a funny segment on one of the radio shows, and they were talking about their Thanksgiving Day schedule.
Okay.
Because everybody's is different. So what is your guys' schedule? Like, do you guys go multiple houses? Do you eat in the morning and at night? Or like, what's the schedule?
I try not to get out of like shorts and a t-shirt.
Wow. Nice.
I eventually probably get forced out of it, but I would, in Jeremy's ideal world, it'd be shorts and a t-shirt, throw the football games on, get those started, and then start the food, and then just graze throughout the day. That would be Jeremy's ideal. Where that ends up happening is usually more of the wife's control than mine.
Yeah, on our side, so we do two different ones, one for my side and one for my wife. Usually Thanksgiving Day is my family side, so it's lunch around noon, a lot of food there, a lot of football action, a few drinks as well, and then kind of grazing the rest of the day, and then by the evening everybody kind of makes their way home. So that's that, and then my wife's side's a couple days later usually.
Yeah, we have 3 Thanksgivings.
Oh wow.
So Steph's family, mom's side is always Thanksgiving morning, or like 11 o'clock ish usually. Mm-hmm. And then we go over to my side around like 3.
Oh, still full from the first one, right?
Yeah.
And having
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Although you can still
Tyler,
yeah. Can still
Tyler likes food.
Can still eat. And then so this year it'll be on Sunday. We'll have my wife's dad's side as well. So we'll have at least a little bit of a break.
Gotcha. Yeah, you got a little breather.
Let the stomach recover.
Do you guys all watch football then on Thursday, or is it indifferent?
It's always on.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's on.
Yeah.
Actually, it's on, but I never like sit down and watch.
Yeah, I guess we're the same way. Unless it's a really good entertaining game or something, right? Yeah.
But I'll check it every now and then, but it's on. We're not the family that sits down and like everybody watches it.
No, I guess we're not either.
Yeah. No,
but
it's in the background, but you might find me there more frequently.
There's
passed out on the couch in his t-shirt.
There's a few guys on Steph's mom's side that they will not leave the couch.
Okay.
Oh, really?
They're just done. Yeah, they're just planted.
Yeah.
The other thing that used to be a big deal for me and my sister-in-law was usually Black Friday's the next day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'd get
usually is. I mean,
well, it always is. Usually, yeah. I guess it always
they keep
is.
changing that around on me.
Thursday, dang it. We used to get the old
Black Friday Saturday this
year.
Exactly.
No.
How do they call it Black Friday? It's
I should say the importance of Black Friday, right? Starting that, and we used to get the big paper, the local, physical paper, and then all the different ads in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be that's when we would compare our shopping list for our kids, especially when they're little, right? We flip through. So that was part of the old Thanksgiving process as well as watching football, where her and I'd be flipping through arguing over who's got what ad for Target or Best Buy. And now you can do it. And now everybody's got their iPad, so they're just kind of you flip.
Well, and Black Friday sales have been going on.
That's what I guess
Black
I meant
Friday
by that.
deals.
Just gonna say,
there's
already there's already like 9 Amazon boxes in my house. 9 of the coming 205. But I've already started that process. It's very different than what it was.
Right, because that used to be.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We
would get specifically go to get the Thursday paper so that we'd had the Friday deals ready to go. Did you ever do like the 4 a.m.s or?
I never did. My one daughter loves shopping, so she's done that with. My wife doesn't like it, so she'd find a friend, and her mom would go, and then
we did it every now and then. We never did like the Walmart push your neighbor down and step on their face kind of thing, but we did do the early. We would just hang out and then go.
I did stand one time.
When we got back.
Was it Toys R Us? There was some kind of little kid's toy or something that high demand too that dropped at some point in time that I wasn't standing in line, but I went in the store and it was just a disaster. Just like, oh my God, it's like this $5 widget. Everybody's just everybody's fighting
all over
it,
man.
God. All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving.
You as well,
both of you. Anybody listening, happy Thanksgiving. And we will see you guys next week.